Hello storytellers, I am writer and artist Lexley, and this is Creator's Cut, where I chronicle my continuing creative journey. Today I'm going to be talking about doing the read-through for my fantasy novel and some of the surprising things that I noticed. As I said, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the read-through for my fantasy novel. Recap, if you are new here, welcome. I am working on a fantasy novel. It is the first in a series, and I am looking at editing it soon, actually pretty much now, and getting an agent and getting it traditionally published, and then moving forward from there, because I do have quite a big project encompassing this series. If you would like to learn more about that, you can refer to episode 2 of Creator's Cut, where I went into detail about the series and a little bit of the history. I have been working on this read-through for about a week now, maybe a little over, somewhere in there. And I am actually kind of surprised by what I noticed. I think read-throughs are always interesting because you get to see how the project has evolved from its initial starting point, whether it was your first draft or not. This is not the first draft of this story by far, as I have mentioned previously. But regardless of any draft, when you actually get into reading it, it's very interesting to see how it changed over time from when you started it to when it ended. Particularly, I always think it's interesting to see how the beginning and the ending unfold in the actual writing versus what were you were thinking like initially when you sat down and decided to write the project or to create the story. So that's one of my favorite things to actually look at. This, I think, was probably the most interesting read-through I've ever had. I've written quite a few novels by now and short stories and screenplays, so this is not my first read-through for sure, but I definitely would say it's one of the most interesting, not necessarily how the story unfolded, but kind of more my mindset through working on it. It took me, about a year, almost a year, not quite a year, to write this draft, to write the working draft. It was definitely a struggle, as I mentioned in my 2025 video. I'm terming it the most difficult project I've ever worked on, the most difficult book I've ever worked on, and I'm just probably going to go ahead and say it will be the most difficult book I will ever work on. I love this story, but it is honestly far more complex than I initially really realized. And it wasn't until I read through this draft that kind of settled in. The way that it read, and I could see my struggle through reading it. And I remember living, that struggle last year when I was actually working on the draft and just pushing through and getting it done. Very interesting to actually be able to see it in the reading. I could feel my struggle that I had, dealt with personally prior. And of course, as writers, you never want the reader to feel your struggle in writing the book, because that just pulls them right out of the story, of course. So definitely, editing needing to be done, but I could actually just feel the struggle that I went through. It was almost like I was reliving it, which was a little nerve-wracking, I'll be honest. There was definitely one point in the read-through that I just kind of had like this mini breakdown, I'm going to be honest. I texted my friend and was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if this story is going to work. Should I, start the series from here or from a different book? Because they're interconnecting stories. This series is 2 interconnecting stories. I was kind of all over the place, many panic episode one day. And so I was texting my friend who's also my beta reader. She's my best friend and beta reader. It's always good to have a beta reader that understands your work and like what you're trying to say. And she's definitely that person. She's been my beta reader for a long time and will tell me if anything is wrong. And I really appreciate that. But back to the read through. I definitely had like this mini panic episode in the middle, not even the middle, I don't even think of reading, but somewhere around there, where I just was texting her and saying like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if I continue this project. I just felt really overwhelmed. And initially I didn't know why that was. And so we met up a few days later and we're actually talking about the project and the read through. And so I had a chance to cool down a little bit and just reassess and not panic anymore. So we sat and compared notes over coffee, and we're talking about my panic and and the story and just kind of everything that had happened in the last year with the story and putting it together and where it was going and all of those good things. And that was when I was able to really concretely realize the two main things that I had learned from this read through. One was that less really is more. And two was that I personally had changed a lot as a writer in the last 6 months, but that my mentality towards writing a story and putting a story together had changed drastically in the last 3 months prior to completing the story and doing the read through. Back in October of 2025, I went to a conference. There I met some really great people, but probably the most helpful person actually ended up being my teacher in the script writing class that I took, just to kind of, get some alternate ideas on writing a script and just refresher and all of that. Funny story, actually, the first day before I went to the class, because it was a continuing class throughout the conference, so I was kind of looking around and just looking at different people and going, I wonder what class they're in. I wonder where they're going to go. And he was actually, my teacher for the script class was actually, in the cafeteria area where we were all eating. And I saw him and I was like, I bet he's going to be in the script class too. Not thinking he would be my teacher. So it was really funny when I, went into the class and was like, oh, you're the teacher. Well, I called that one pretty well. But he was great, super nice guy, very grateful to him. We talked about, my project and different agents and, just different things with scripts and screenplays and all of the above. I had a really good class over those days. But one of the things that he talked about was that for this project, I kind of told him how long I'd been working on it and how much of a challenge it had been, and just sort of sharing my insecurities slightly, because we all have insecurities, of course, especially when you're working on a big project and you're still in the throes of actually getting it done and polished and put together. One of the main things we talked about was that this particular story was the beginning, not just the beginning of the series, but the beginning of this whole big project, and how the beginning is always the most difficult and the most complicated, because the beginning is what sets up the rest of the story. Particularly if it's a series, you have to get all of the pieces correct in the beginning in order for everything that comes after that to make sense and to really fit well and flow well. The beginning has to be not perfect, because nothing is perfect, but as close to perfect as possible. And that can, one, be a lot of pressure, but it's also a lot of work. And so definitely something I thought of with this project, how complex it was, that I could see in the draft, me trying to put the pieces here and there and there and there to all fit so that the next book works seamlessly, the book after that, the rest of the series. So that was a good reminder. Definitely played into the first part of what I realized in the read through, was that less is more. What do I mean by that? We know the saying less is more. It's been around for forever, probably. And there's a lot of truth to it. But when it comes to stories, typically with novels, I've always heard that everything in the story has to serve the narrative. Every scene has to fit with the narrative. It has to drive the story forward. It has to add to the plot, the characters, what have you. It has to all fit with the narrative, everything that goes into the novel. While I think that's great advice, and I definitely agree, I don't think it necessarily fell into place in my mind in the way that it did now. I noticed a key difference when I went back to read over it, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I not only was looking at finishing the novel and editing it, but writing the screenplay. And this is something I knew I wanted to do from the get-go, from when I started the project. I knew I wanted it to be adapted to film, but it was also kind of in the back of my mind as I was writing, the varying drafts of this story, and even as I was writing this prior draft or this working draft of the story. It was a dream and something I wanted to do, but it was also back here in the back of my mind, not consciously thinking of that with the story that I was writing or with the novel that I was writing. That really shifted in October when I went to the conference and I was talking to different people, particularly my script writing or screen script writing teacher, and just talking about the series as not only a novel, but as film as well, and kind of just thinking, that can't just be a dream. I have to actually work actively towards that as well. And it is, you know, something that I can do, which I talked about in the 2025 video too. Kind of had to transition from, oh, this is a dream, this is something I can do in the future, to, hey, this is definitely viable and I can do this and I can get it done and I can do it now and it's absolutely something I can accomplish. That mindset change made me look at the story more, not necessarily writing it like a film, because if you have ever screenwritten, is that a word? Done screenwriting, you know that screenwriting and prose, very different things. Film and novels are very different things, completely different medium. And do things in film that you can do in a novel, and vice versa as well. I happen to really enjoy both, but very different. So I don't mean writing the novel like writing a screenplay or writing a movie, or not writing a movie, but, you know, writing a novel like a movie. There we go. That's what I'm trying to get out here. I'm not talking about writing a novel like a movie. You know, they have their own strengths, and I appreciate that about both of them. So I don't like trying to make one like the other, because it's not one going to happen really, honestly. And two, I feel like it kind of overrides the strengths of both mediums. So my personal 2 cents. What I'm talking about, however, is when I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to adapt this to a screenplay, and looking at it from that perspective and starting to kind of see the film in my mind, the book needed to be very concise, couldn't be weighted down. Going back to the narrative, right? All of the scenes have to feed into the narrative and serve the narrative. When I started looking at that from a film point of view, because in a film, you only have so much time, right? You really can't include extra scenes that don't matter to the narrative, because you don't have room for them. You have to cut everything that's extraneous. It has to literally just be, this is the story, these are the main points, and then all the scenes have to fit with those main points. You don't have room to go off on tangents, or, you know, do something over here that fits but doesn't totally fit, or isn't completely important to the main points of the story. Like, you don't have time for that, which is honestly why I think a lot of film adaptations struggle, you know, sometimes, because readers are expecting the book, but a film that is basically the book, and they're 2 different things. So you can't fit everything in there that you fit in a book, and you can't tell it the same way that you write a book, because, you know, they're not the same. And you don't have the same amount of time, and you don't have the same tools, and, you know, all of that. That's probably a rant for another day. Sorry, getting off on that tangent. But so I started looking at the novel from that viewpoint of, okay, so if I adapt this to a film, or when I adapt this to a film, I am going to have to not only condense it in a way, but also make sure that it's very clear. All the plot points are very clear. All the scenes are very clear. They all relate to the main story points. And, you know, it all has to fit seamlessly, because you have to get in there and tell the story within an hour and 20 minutes, or whatever, however long it happens to be. We'll just say an hour and 20 minutes. 120 pages. You have to tell the whole story. All of the scenes, it's everything. 120 pages, 120 minutes. That's it. It has to all be concise. So I started thinking of that, and then how does that translate to a novel? Again, they're not the same thing, but I do believe that the principle is the same. Scenes have to serve the narrative versus, you know, the scenes have to still serve the narrative in film. So when I kind of transitioned my mind to thinking of it from a film perspective, I actually was able to look at the book and go, okay, how can I make this better? One, but how can I make this more concise, like a film? Not because I'm trying to make it a film, but because I'm trying to make it the best it can be, honestly, and not weigh the story down. That was the thing that I ended up realizing in a way that was different than when, you know, I had been told, oh, all the scenes have to support the narrative. I don't know what it was about thinking about it, you know, as a film, and just only having that amount of time and it having to be smooth, you know, versus a novel. I think because a novel can be really as long as you want it to be, arguably as long as you want it to be, you kind of just think, oh, I have all this time and I have all this space and I can put on all these cool scenes, and, you know, they relate to the main points of the story, but maybe loosely, or I can add, you know, overlapping plots right here. Like, instead of making a scene about, you know, this one particular thing, I can have it be about like 5 different things, which you can. I mean, you know, again, arguably you can, but is that the best way to tell the story? That's a question. And because this novel that I finish was very complicated in the first place, just complex. There were parts of it where I had unintentionally, overwhelmed the story, particularly because it's gone through so many drafts. I had brought things from prior drafts that I liked. I wanted to try them out in this draft with, this new direction. And it's not that they were bad, it's just that they overwhelmed the story as a whole. I came up with this analogy. Basically, this is my thought. A story is a bridge between you and the audience. All bridges have points that bear weight all the way along the bridge, and you only have so many. Those are the main story points. In order to keep the bridge from collapsing, you can only stack so much on top of it, right? You have those main story points, they hold up the bridge between you and the audience. The more weight you put on top of the bridge, the more scenes, the more weight there is. The main points, which are the load-bearing parts of the bridge, can only handle so much. So you put too much weight on top, the bridge collapses and the story collapses. Any story can only hold so much. There has to be a balance, but it has to be straightforward enough to where it, keeps those main points in mind, right? And doesn't go over those main points. You don't put too much weight on the bridge or on the story to make it collapse. Hopefully that's a good enough analogy. It's still a little bit of a I'm still thinking this through, but that was my realization, was that, I have this big story. It is complex. I love the fact that it's complex, and it can be complex, but all of those complexities have to serve the story, right? All of those complexities have to be told and measured and balanced in a way to where the bridge does not collapse. And that's where I come to the point of less is more, because a lot of the time, we get these grandiose ideas, right? And all these cool things that can work with the main points of the story, but a lot of the time they can be too much, or they override the other things that are happening. They kind of override the main points to where those points are there, but they're a little bit muddled underneath everything else. And that puts too much weight on the story. Even if it doesn't collapse, even if it's still held up, it's not clear anymore, not concise enough. Those main points don't shine through as they should. So a lot of the time, less really is more, because the story is more concise, more clear, and more enjoyable at the end of the day. So that was one of the main things that I realized from going over this read through, over this draft, was that there were definite points where I needed to take things out, not because they were bad, but just because they put too much pressure on the main points of the story, and it made it a little too complex, and scenes got boggled down by, multiple ideas that were not bad, but didn't really balance the story overall. So that was why I actually ended up getting overwhelmed. There is a particular point where I made a decision in this draft, and it worked fine, but it didn't work well. And I didn't know that when I was writing it, of course. But, I could see it going back, and I was like, I need to change that. And changing that changed a lot after it, changed everything after it, not necessarily the events of the story, but the way they unfolded. Initially, that was very overwhelming. I was like, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff I have to take out and fix and change, and I was overwhelmed thinking, like, is that going to work? Can I make that work? But as I read through it a little bit more and calmed myself down, I realized that, yes, that can work. That will work great, actually, because by changing that, then I can make everything else more seamless, make it flow better, take out some of these complexities, makes the scenes more straightforward so that they serve, those bedrock points, the points of the bridge, and I can focus more on what's actually happening to carry those points of the story through and just make it a overall more enjoyable experience. So that was the the first thing that I learned, and I'm really happy that I did learn that and actually see it and kind of could refine my thoughts on building a story even more. We have these great ideas, and it's not that they're bad ideas, but sometimes the cool factor, if you will, like that's so neat, I want to do that and that and that and that, can even get a seasoned writer off track sometimes, or just not necessarily thinking about the best way to balance a story can make it to where the draft is fine or the book is fine. It's not bad, it's it's good, but it's just not as good as it could be if it was a little more focused. It was an enjoyable experience once I got over the slight panic. I definitely enjoy looking at it from this perspective because I feel like it makes putting the story together a little easier, honestly, and I feel a more what's the word I'm looking for? Confident. I feel more confident that it is a well put together story, and not just well put together, but that it flows super well, that it's, enjoyable all the way through, that it is complex in the right places and the right ways, but not overly complex to where the story gets lost. The last year was a struggle. I said that in my 2025 video. It was a struggle with the story. It was a struggle in general, but I grew a lot through it. And I'm even just, now after looking back over the last year, still realizing how much I've grown, not only in my work, but just personally. And I think that's a really good feeling. Sit down with yourself and don't just look at, oh, what did I go through last year? The end of the year thing, the beginning of the year thing, but every so often just kind of look and go, how have I changed in this aspect? Whether it's work or personal or, relationship wise, whatever it is, just be a little bit more proud of yourself. So I am looking forward to the edit of this novel now that I have gotten my brain straight about it and gone through the read through and seen, where I can improve it, where I can fix it. And I think it's really funny. I like to talk about this in general, but I think it's really funny how God just kind of like arranges everything, because that one plot point or that one particular point that I looked at and was like, no, I need to change that. And that's going to be so much work. Of course, it's going to be so much work, but I was worried about, now that I'm at the end of the novel, I'm going, yeah, this is going to be work, but it's going to be so much better. It's going to be so much better. It's all just kind of fallen into place. And I love that. So I'm very excited to do the edit. I really am. And I'm going to be starting on it probably today. So before the end of the video, I also had one other fun thing that happened this week. I met up with my friend, my beta, my bestie, whatever, you want to call her. Kat. We'll call her Kat, because that's kind of my nickname for her. But I met up with her this week, and I guess the popular thing for this year is 2026 bingo, or year bingo, where you print out a bingo sheet and then you write out just different things that you want to do for the year on each of the squares. And then like when you actually accomplish that, you cross it off and eventually you'll probably have bingo. So we actually made one of those sheets. It's over here on my wall back there. back there. There we go. So that was a lot of fun. If you want to give that a try, you can look it up online, print out a bingo sheet, decorate it, the whole 9 yards. I thought it was a lot of fun, so I just figured I'd share that. But thank you for watching and listening to me ramble about my read through. I hope you enjoyed this video and you got something good out of it. And I will see you in the next video talking about my edit, which will not be complete within a week, but we're going to make progress. And I hope you make good progress in whatever you have going on this week too. Hello storytellers, I'm Ritus. Hello storytellers, I'm Ritus. Why do I keep wanting to say Ritus? This is the thing. Writer and artist, Ritus. It's okay. We'll coin that.